Hi, welcome to Culture Shot. So this week I had an insight into just how complex organizations, particularly corporate organizations, can make culture building and how self-defeating it is when they purposefully build complexity into it. Let me explain what I mean by this. So I had a conversation with an organization about, honestly, 2 years ago, where they were going through a particular change in their industry. There was a particular thing that was going on, and they could identify what it was. And ultimately what it came down to was they were going to have a lot more competition, and they were very bad at customers. They were very bad at taking care of customers. They weren't particularly customer centric. They took 4 days to phone customers back, because up until this point they'd kind of had a monopoly on what they were doing, and they didn't have a lot of competition. And so it was a thing that served them at the time, or leastways it was a thing that they were able to get away with. Perhaps that's a better way of putting it. They were able to get away with it, but they were no longer going to be able to get away with it, and so they needed to change. And when they articulated that to me, it was quite clear to me that they'd understood that there was a challenge, and they had a good idea about what they needed to do to address that challenge. I mean, the first thing was they could identify it, and then what they were going to try and do is they were going to try and tackle this through some sort of a culture intervention, the culture change or something like that. This all sounded good to me, because by and large, when we start talking about culture and we start talking about the need for culture, my question will always be, well, what do you want to achieve with it? I mean, there's got to be a reason, there's got to be an outcome. We don't just change culture for the sake of changing culture, because it's difficult and it's hard and it often doesn't take us anywhere anyway, and it requires a hell of a lot of resources, etc. We start to do it when we've identified a problem and we know that the culture of the organization is creating the problem or is exacerbating the problem in some way, and we need to get around that. And these guys seem to have that down pat. They seem to have figured that out. So I was really optimistic about it. But in subsequent interactions, what tended to happen over the course of the next 2 years was they got deeper and deeper and deeper into a systemized approach to culture change. This very deep, multifaceted, multi-part change, which was, it just got increasingly complex. Eventually they're dealing with a particular pillar related to this and a particular pillar related to that. I mean, you can imagine what the PowerPoint slides looked like, right? And it distressed me, because all that seems to have happened is they've got further and further away from the solution to their problem. They'd identified the problem. They were just within arm's reach, of a solution to this. And then they began to make it complex. And I think they did so because to suggest that this stuff is simple goes against the grain for them. They can't. It's anathema to them. They cannot possibly accept that something as complex as culture can be simply resolved. Now, in a way, they're right. There is a lot of complexity here. In a way, it does take a lot of energy, and it does take a lot of time. But fundamentally, that's all it takes. The solution to this stuff, the solution to most of the people problems you have, is relatively easy to identify. Now, if we can just get to the point that we can accept that, then we can get better at solving these things. It's easy to identify what's wrong. It's hard to fix it. And that's where we get mixed up. We think that what we need to do is we need to find a really complex way of identifying it. We need to get more data, more analysis, spend more time, set up more support groups, more steering committees, whatever the hell it might be, to get to the point that we should have already got to anyway, because instinctively we know our organizations and we know what's going on. The complexity, and this is a bit that we get wrong, this is a bit where we misunderstand. The complexity isn't that the solution is hard, it's just that it takes time. It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes effort, and it takes repetition. It's a little bit like raising children, right? There's no right or wrong way to do this, but if you invest time and energy and effort into it and focus and kind of be a bit instinctive about what you're seeing and what feedback you're getting and try and do something about that, you'll probably do an okay job, because actually you probably will. I mean, there's no perfect way to do this. So the way in which you do it, and the way in which your people, your children, whatever, respond to you as a parent, the way in which your employees might respond to you as a management group, those things are going to be a lot about instinct and course correction along the way, which means you just need to get started. Stop with the steering committees. Stop with the analysis. Stop with the constant conversation about should we, shouldn't we. Stop with the PowerPoint decks, for God's sake. Please stop with these things and do something. This organization was very, very close to getting on the road and getting on with it. And if they'd done so, I'm pretty sure they'd have solved their problem already, because they understood what it was. And along the way, as they tried to solve it, as they tried to move down that road and try this and try that, they'd have failed at some things, they'd have found some success in other things. That would have informed what they needed to do next, and they'd have just got on with it, and they'd have got better at it. And as a result of it, I'm pretty sure they'd be in a position right now where they'd have solved their problems, and they'd be moving on to the next level. Instead, we're still at the PowerPoint stage, and it distresses me enormously. because they're not alone. This is common. This is the way it goes. This is the way it goes for so many organizations. This is the way it goes so much of the time. If you could just do this one thing this week, think about getting rid of the complexity from your thinking. If you are struggling with any kind of a people problem or any kind of a behavioral problem or whatever, and you can identify that behavioral problem relatively quickly, i.e. there's too many people late for work, or people don't phone customers back on time, or whatever it might be, you've already got the nub of what it is you're trying to fix. All of your cultural behaviors, all of your cultural work from now on should be about trying to solve that problem. If you can solve that problem, it's a bit like dropping a pebble into a pond. All the ripples go out and other things start to get resolved, because the moment you get more customer-centric, then you'll probably get more cooperation inside the organization, more teamwork. People will tend to work together better because they have to in order to solve these problems. And so a lot of the other cultural challenges that you think you might have will start to resolve themselves before you even necessarily need to do the work on them. The corollary of this, or not the corollary, that's the wrong word, the opposite way of looking at this is that you try to identify all of the problems you can possibly come up with first and then come up with a universal solution. And that's what tends to happen. And that happens a lot. And that happens especially with large corporate organizations, because we cannot accept that these things are simple. We're wrong. They are. We just need to get on with it more. That's been on my mind this week. That's been food for thought for me. I hope it's food for thought for you as well. And I wish you a great week.